Welcome to the Driven Dental Podcast, where all things dental drive our curiosity to have meaningful conversations about self-development, business scalability, and prioritizing people over profits. This podcast will leave you ready to drive your practice to new levels of success. I am Matt Robinson, COO and co-founder of Operation Dental, writer of the Driven Dental Practice, and your host. Dentistry is about its people. Let's hear from them. Welcome to the Driven Dental Podcast. My name is Matt Robinson. I'm the COO of Operation Dental, and I'm here today with the CEO of Operation Dental, Dr. Peter Kelly. And what we're going to do today is talk about the history of our company. And we feel like we have created something unique in the dental industry, and we want to tell people about it and take you down memory lane and discuss what we've learned, the mistakes we've made, but also the things we've done right, and really how we've built the company from the ground up into something that we feel is pretty special. Some basic facts about Operation Dental. We started in 2017, really, like technically the end of 2016 is when we met, but we really started the company in the beginning of 2017, and we've, with one practice, your practice, and we've grown now to 17 practices, around 250 employees, 33 dentists, 15 of them being partner dentists with us. And this year we're on pace to do around 40 million, 2024. So it's been definitely a very exciting journey so far. And on this first podcast that we're doing, I wanted to really learn more about you, from your childhood, and then we can just go back and forth and talk through the years pretty much. So if you could start by telling us about your background and how you got into dentistry.
Yeah. So I guess my story is a bit unique in the fact that dentistry has always been around me since like my earliest memory. My grandfather was a dentist. My two uncles were dentists. My sister became a dentist, and my two cousins also became dentists as well. So I have very early memories of sitting, with my grandfather and my uncle talking about teeth, giving me advice on brushing my own teeth, but also telling me about the wonderful things about the profession. And I was lucky that they had such a positive outlook on it, and it seems like something special that they wanted to protect. I wanted to become a dentist before I wanted to become a firefighter and professional baseball player. So yeah, having that kind of foundation, it's no surprise that dentistry is where I landed. My dad is an emergency room physician, so seeing how his lifestyle was growing up, he was at work, throughout the night. So when I was a small kid, I didn't really see him a ton. And he was vocal about how that affected him, the stress of hospital, professional life. I spent many nights at the hospital with him. That's kind of how we spent some quality time when I was younger. So healthcare in general was always like a big part of our childhood. My dad even, the options for all of us were kind of like, you either become a doctor or a dentist, and that's basically it. So my dad was basically, like a first generation type of father almost, in the sense that it was like, you got to become a professional or I'm going to disown you, more or less.
So how did you choose dentistry over?
I started college in high school. I started taking classes when I was 16. I wanted to become a physician at a very early age, and I just figured, why don't I just get started now while I was still in high school? And I wasn't really like a big fan of how high school was. Like, I just kind of felt like I was in daycare. The fact that I couldn't just leave to go to McDonald's seemed ridiculous to me. So as soon as I could, I just was like, I signed up for college classes. And financially, it was a great move because my high school paid for all of my tuition and even paid me to go on top of my tuition. So the first guitar I ever bought was with the money that I got from my high school. That was, basically a stipend to go to the local junior college. And, I started my junior year of high school, and my senior year of high school, I was already taking like organic chemistry and just getting well into my prereqs. And I graduated high school with an AA degree, which is basically a 2-year program. So when I got to University of Florida, I had already 2 years of college done by the time I was 18. So my college experience was great because I took like 12 hours a semester when a lot of my peers were cramming in 18 hours a semester because they're basically starting from the beginning. Um, so yeah, I kind of had this almost like expedited like path of becoming what I first thought would be a physician, but I quickly realized that that lifestyle may not be for me. And even my own dad was like, you probably should consider dentistry, just based on what you like to do outside of work. I like my hobbies, music and surfing and sports. So I looked at dentistry, and my sister had just got accepted into University of Alabama Birmingham Dental School, and so uh, I actually took the MCAT originally, which is the medical college admissions test, and I didn't score the greatest on that. I was kind of more into like the band that I was playing in at the time. A year later, I ended up taking the DAT, which is the dental admissions test, and for any of the people know about those types of tests, I got the same score on both tests, but one was out of 45 and one was out of 30. So I scored much higher on the dental test. So that was kind of like my path was already starting to form in front of me.
So then you went to Baltimore, right?
Yeah, I went to Baltimore for dental school. I was lucky to get into dental school because I didn't really apply to a ton of schools initially. Um, so yeah, Baltimore is known to accept a lot of out of state students, which was good. And my other sister, was living in Baltimore at the time. So I had her there that I could support me as I was 21 years old when I started dental school, so I was still a kid. So moving to a big city like that, on my own was pretty daunting. So having her there was like pretty awesome.
And what was dental school like for you?
Um, you know, dental school was very overwhelming. It was overwhelming for all of us. I was told probably within the first month that I would make some of my closest friends in dental school. Um, and that was absolutely true because you go through so much and you spend so much time with these people. You really do form some great relationships with your classmates. And I mean, dental school is a bit abusive, just like a lot of other professional schools. They abuse your ability to remember useless facts over and over and over again. Um, you know, my first year, I did gross. We all have to do gross anatomy, which is where you dissect a cadaver, and experiences like that where you're spending 8 hours in the lab with the cadaver, and by the time you get out of there, it's dark out and you smell. I'm coming from sunny Florida where like winters, I don't know really what a real winter is like. So living in Baltimore, that was kind of like a wake up call to four seasons. Um, but all in all, I mean, it was an experience that was unforgettable. There's the best of times and the worst of times, as they say.
And then your first job out of dental school was with a large DSO in Jacksonville.
Yeah, so I was torn between, moving out west or going back to Florida where my family still is. And I ended up choosing Florida. I I had to take a whole separate test to go to Florida. And that was a I had to take the test twice actually because I failed the first time. So that was it was a bit of a chore to get my license in the state of Florida, basically to come home. Um, but yeah, ended up choosing Florida. I chose St. Augustine because uh, I like to surf. It was kind of like a small beach town, different from my hometown of Pensacola. I didn't want to go back to Pensacola. I was kind of wanting to just have a new chapter in my life. So I chose St. Augustine. Really loved living there. Ended up working for a big DSO that many of us know. But I only lasted there for about a year. They ended up moving me up to Jacksonville to a busier office because as much as I like St. Augustine, it was a slow office. I was the low totem pole doctor, and they had a lot of offices. So whenever there would be an opening in a busier office, they'd let you know about it and give you the option to move to that office, which I jumped on that and ended up living in Jacksonville for about a year. So yeah, that was my first year out of dental school.
So why did you end up leaving them?
That first year is I didn't do a residency program. I just wanted to go straight into practice. To be honest with you, I was just looking to make an income, spending a whole year out of school, learning more and getting a residency salary. I was just I was ready for the big leagues, I guess, or at least I thought I was ready for the big leagues. I really wasn't. I wasn't even close to ready. This corporation, they did offer a lot of training within the first year, but there was always this overbearing like pressure to produce. Every morning huddle, it was like, how much money did we make yesterday? How much money are we going to make today? I saw how there was just this top-down focus on greed. I don't know how else to describe it, but I was so young. I thought was just the way healthcare was. But over time, I just started to notice that no, this is just the way these big corporate DSOs are. They're just very money hungry, and I was really thirsty for just a more authentic way of practicing. So I lasted here for a year, and I was ready to move on like very quickly.
So where did you move on to after that?
So I ended up working as an associate in a small practice that was owned privately. It was a husband and wife, and that was a much better experience than the corporation. It was what I expected dentistry to be like. So I was able to practice dentistry at my comfort level, really, and there wasn't really any pressure to produce or do anything unethical, which is how I felt working for the big corporation.
So how long were you there?
I was an associate for probably less than a year. I was thinking about buying into that practice because that was kind of on the table as an option. But I got this pull to Orlando, maybe because I knew you were there. I had Jacksonville was a great place to live. I think I had more of a social group in Orlando at the time, and I ended up having this itch of wanting to buy my own practice because I had worked for a corporation, I had been an associate, and I can't say that either was really fulfilling me in the way that I was hoping. So I mean, it was really like, well, there's one more thing to try. I could just buy a practice, and this was back in 2013 where you could actually buy a practice,
Right.
for like a reasonable price. So I found a practice for sale in Winter Park, Florida. I had never really spent much time in Winter Park. I just knew it was a nice area, and I made a visit, met the selling doctor, and he was this really nice, gentle man that kind of reminded me of like my grandfather and my uncles. So it felt very like family like. and he was just in like a standalone building, and I just felt like, wow, this is, I think this is for me. So I jumped on the opportunity to purchase it. Got a great deal on it, even though I didn't think I did at the time. I mean, looking back, it was like, man, you might have stole that practice from that poor man.
So then you finally had your own practice, and you were how old at the time?
I was 27 when I
27.
bought my first practice.
So what were some of the more eye-opening experiences of practice ownership?
Well, I have a tendency to have a big vision for what I do, and as I've gotten older, the reality of those visions have become more attenuated. But buying that practice, I thought, like I'd finally make really good money as a dentist, because I really, for a dentist, I never made over. I made below the average salary of a dentist for the first 2 years out of school. So I thought buying a practice, I'd be like, I'm gonna, make the money that I was hoping to make. And I would also have all this free time. I could travel. I could go to Puerto Rico and go surfing, because I had this big vision of what was in store for me. And the first month I bought the practice, it was a great month. I bought it in March, busiest month of the year.
Right.
It was a very busy month that first, right after buying it, and but after that it started to really taper off, and I didn't really know what to do. I started to worry a little bit. I was only getting 10 to 15 new patients a month, and I was in network with PPOs. I was coming from the corporations and even the private practice where they were getting hundreds of new patients a month. And here I am in my own office and I'm getting 10 to 15. And so that was a reality check for me of like, I was like, wow, I am on my own now and I got a new patient problem and I don't know how to fix it. I kind of thought that just existing would be enough to bring people in the door. But it wasn't.
And there was also a bit of a culture shock,
Yeah.
I believe. If you could talk just about the management struggles you had.
Yeah, I mean, I was 27 at the time. I really had zero business knowledge. I mean, I thought just because I had a dental degree, I was qualified to own a practice, when that's not entirely true. Yeah, I was also young enough to be every single one of my employees' son, which I think was a challenge for me and maybe a challenge for them too, to accept that. They were used to practicing with a dentist from 2 generations ago, not one generation, two, maybe 3 generations ago. And it was just, I mean, dentists of that era just come from a totally different kind of background. I mean, they didn't even, marketing wasn't even a thing in, I don't know, 60s, 70s, maybe even the early 80s. Marketing wasn't really heavy in dentistry. It wasn't really, a part of dentistry until like the Yellow Pages came out, and then I think that's maybe when dentists started to utilize marketing and advertising. So he was coming from a totally different era. All his staff members looked up to him. They idolized him, and they weren't really that busy because the office was small and he was just kind of working just to work. Honestly don't even know if he really needed to work. I could be wrong about that, but he was there for 40 years, every day, and his practice was doing at $500,000 a year. So this is a business that this person had for that amount of time, and it was doing $500,000 in revenue. And here I am. I just bought it for $300,000. I got a $3,000 monthly note to pay the bank, and all these employees are now asking me for raises. And here I am. I gotta figure this out.
Yeah. So it's safe to say it was a bit more of a struggle than you thought it would be, practice ownership. So this is 2013 you bought it, correct?
Correct.
And then, okay. So we met in 2016. Where was your headspace at that point?
Well, a bit about my personal life at the time. I was in a long-term relationship. I got engaged. Uh, it was a long distance relationship. That's actually the primary thing about it. And it's kind of hard to focus on a business when you, your significant others 1,000 miles away, and you're kind of wondering what's going to become of your life. So I was in a bit of a kind of tough spot with that. That relationship ended up ending, and when it ended, that was kind of like a new chapter for me to really focus on my practice. Now that I felt like, you know, one foot wasn't out the door really, because that's kind of how it was for those first few years. It was possibly the hardest 3 years of my life, trying to build that office in the beginning, really not knowing what I was doing. So that was kind of like a new chapter for me. And I started to make progress growing my office, started heading in the right direction, on an upward slope. And that's when I met you.
So, for a quick background on myself, while you had 27 dentists in your family, I didn't even know dentistry was a business as far as outside of just being a dentist. I had no idea there was a business of dentistry. And I grew up in Orlando, and like you, through in high school, I started college, so I graduated a year early, or I graduated with 1 year of college complete.
We're so smart.
Yeah, really smart. Um, we started to fail early. We got to fail early.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I didn't know what I wanted to do after undergrad, so I went back and got an MBA. Similar to you, it was 2 years of very, very intense studying. And I, after graduating, I still didn't know what I wanted to do really. So I ended up working with somebody who had gone to the school that I went to, but he was an older guy. He had his own business already. He was maybe 20 years older than I was. And he was going back, I think, and getting his degree at the same time. Is how I randomly met him. Anyway, I worked with him at a title company for a couple years, and it was a great time to be in real estate. This was before the crash of 2008, so Countrywide was our number one customer, and we were getting loans enough that I was there 8 a.m. until midnight at least half the month, because the second half of the month is when you're pushing. So I was working really hard with that, and then this guy happened to be one of those people that when something would go wrong, he would come in and start throwing chairs and tipping desks over and yelling, and never yelled at me, but he yelled at enough people to know that it wasn't the best environment to work in. So one of the sales guys actually left and started his own company and said, "Do you want to come manage this for me?" So I left and started managing that, and we built that for about a year and a half. And then the real estate industry just tanked, just almost overnight. So I knew that wasn't where I should be. And then I stumbled into business. It was business brokers in Winter Park. And it was two retired, I can't even remember what they did. One was a construction worker. Anyway, they had a lot of contacts in Winter Park, sounded great. They flashed the magical, you'll make $100,000 with us per deal we do. And they had 4 large companies that were for sale. And I was so just young and naive. I just heard 100,000 and didn't think about the industry at all, or the time, that it was a terrible time to be in that industry, and just went for it. And it's actually where I ended up meeting 2 of the people that are on our executive team now. So it worked out for that, but that actual year we didn't sell any companies. I lost every bit of my savings and had to start over in life, and took a job at a place that I never wanted to work at, and ended up getting comfortable there and getting high enough up in the company that made it difficult to move, and ended up staying there for 7 years in management and in purchasing. So at that point, I was at another all-time low after just being there and feeling stuck. So I just took a week off, and how I found dentistry was just a complete accident. I was just researching what industries were growing, because I just, at that point, I had been working about 10 years. I still hadn't landed on anything that was like my calling. And I saw on the Inc. 5000 time and time again, dental management, dental consulting, dental DSO. I had no idea what any of these things really were, but I just knew that I enjoyed managing people in a small business, and that it made perfect sense to me that dentists went to school to be dentists, not to run the business. So I ended up just leaving that job because I knew I had to just get out to get out of there and just start something new. So I sent out cold call emails to a group of dentists that I got through the one friend of mine that I knew was a dentist, and he was in part of this Dental Society of Orlando. He gave me 300 email addresses of dentists. I created a fake company, just Operation Dental, based off of the larger DSOs and dental marketing sites out there. I just kind of mimicked them, and I basically said in that email, an MBA, I'm looking to start something, but I don't know anything about dentistry. I need to partner with a dentist to learn. So you responded to that email and said, let's meet. And we went to Chipotle.
I found that email recently.
Yes, I have
I
it.
sent it to you.
Yeah, I kept it.
We need to frame it.
Someday it'll be up here. Anyway, so we met at Chipotle. I think it was October of 2016. And you basically said, like, I have this practice. I want to grow this practice. I'm having a hard time keeping the front desk. I think you had been through 7 in the last year.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I definitely parted ways with one front desk and rehired her for a 50% salary increase like a year later. So yeah, it's basically 7.
Well, yeah, and you went through.
Yeah, there's a handful in between her too. So
yeah, so the next day you said, let's do this. Come work in my office and you can learn dentistry. So the next day went to your office to start to learn dentistry.
Yeah, it was next day.
And no one from your office would talk to me because they were terrified of me.
Well, I talked to you because I was very happy that you were there.
Yes, thankfully. But the beginning was tricky because it was a very similar culture, in that we were young, hungry, wanted to grow something, and they were comfortable. Yeah, which is fine.
Yeah, I think most of those employees have retired.
Yeah,
by now, or getting close to it. So yeah, we were just a totally different mindset. And what I noticed within that first week was how different you were. Your ability to absorb information like a sponge, like on these 24-hour intervals. I was just like, holy cow. Like, this is awesome to have somebody that is so driven. It was awesome.
Yeah. I mean, after what I had gone through, I was so hungry, and I don't know, from the very beginning, I just knew like something was different about this. Like I can make this into my thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, in that first year, I think we both learned a lot. And I think I was obviously learning dentistry itself, and you were teaching me what all of this meant. But I think I was helping you get to the point where you needed to be as a dentist, just because you had never really been pushed by that first team.
Yeah, that was the biggest impact initially, was the push, because the front desk that I had before you were there was so scared to overbook me. They left big holes in between patients, and it's just, they wanted to avoid like any bit of stress throughout the day. And I mean, you don't want to have like a day that's an absolute disaster, but you have to have some bit of stress to kind of get through a day that's productive. Mm-hmm. So when you were there, you were always adding, more patients to the schedule and kind of forcing me in the back to become more efficient, not only with like what I was doing clinically, but like what I was saying to patients. I needed to get to the point a little bit more swiftly, and focus on scripted languages to kind of, so I'm not just sitting there talking forever, wasting precious time. There were a few moments where I would think it to myself. I was like, "Gosh, Matt, another patient." But it forced me. You're like my coach. Like, you're pushing me to another level, from a production standpoint. And I think there's a bit of the story that we're skipping, and I want to kind of touch on it a bit. Before I met you, probably like a year before I met you, the seller doctor that I bought the practice from had an intervention with me. The staff was noticing that my clinical work wasn't consistent. I'd have a filling that had like an open contact. My crowns weren't always perfect. They could tell that I was rushing, and that they could just tell that I'm stressed too. And that's probably why my front desk was booking me the way they were booking me, because they saw how I was when things were chaotic. And the seller doctor had an intervention with me. One day after work, he came to the office, told me he wanted to talk to me, and basically had like a father-son discussion with me as a dentist. And he was unhappy with me. He was telling me that, the staff is unhappy with my clinical work. And, initially I got defensive, because I'm looking at him, and he's from, like we said, a different generation. I have all sorts of challenges that he didn't really have. PPO insurances that are paying me half what I should be, or what I think I should be getting paid. Staff challenges. I bought the practice from him, so I have this debt that he never had. So I was initially on the defense with that discussion, but we spent over an hour talking. By the time he left, it was nighttime, and he as he was leaving, he turned around and told me, he's like, "Peter, if you can't figure out how to be a good dentist, you should find something else to do."
Wow.
And like, that was heavy. I went home, and I don't think I slept that night, and I kind of thought about what he said. And by the time it was morning time, I had to go back to the office, and I realized that he was right. And my staff was right, that that my work wasn't consistent. It wasn't good. And I made a decision that very next day, because I was struggling financially. And that's part of the big reason why the work was suffering. I was struggling financially, and I made a decision that, I'm going to be the best dentist I can be. I'm going to slow down, and I'm going to be an artist with what I do. And I told myself, like, if I go out of business doing this, then so be it. And that was like the best thing that ever happened to me, because that's exactly what I did. I started slowing down. I started, putting detail in my occlusion, like making like restorations that actually look like teeth, making sure my margins were perfect and my crown seats were perfect. If it wasn't perfect, I sent it back to the lab. If the filling didn't have a perfect contact, I took it out and redid it. But the biggest thing for me was just slowing down. And with slowing down, I was able to get good at dentistry. I was also able to connect more with my patients. And maybe a couple months of that, that's really when my practice started to go upwards. So yeah, that I had to tell that.
So you always say get good before you get fast to your dentist.
I love that. I love that saying.
How long did it take you, would you say, to get good when you could speed up a little bit?
With basic restorative dentistry, well, let's set aside, surgical, endodontics, and all the heavy stuff. Basic restorative dentistry, not that long, because that's what your education's about. Luckily, I went to a good dental school, and it was really, for me, just going back to my education, what I learned in dentistry, what acceptable dentistry was, evidence-based dentistry, clinical acceptability. And it 30 days, that can make a massive shift in, the quality of your work. But you got to slow down. It means if you're already in a busy practice, you got to take a look at your situation and be like, I need to kind of cut back a little bit. I want to spend more time refining what I'm doing. And then once you get the basics down consistently, you get someone like yourself who pushes you. It makes your schedule, tighter, more
Right.
productive.
So when we first met, we spoke about having multiple practices, right? And that being the goal. Do you know where that came from for you personally?
When we first met, I went to San Diego for a Mark Costas conference, and that was kind of like a life-changing experience. I think you were going to come with me, but for some reason, maybe you had to work or something in my office.
Oh, you're right.
I remember.
Yeah, you're right.
You were supposed to come. So I went by myself, and that for me was such a catalyst for what we were doing. And we were listening to some podcasts. We were listening to Mike Abernathy, who was a great resource. I think we jumped on a call with him too, when we were just little guys. And I think you were definitely really excited about multiple locations, and I was hesitant because I was looking at my situation of this one office and how hectic it was. The thought of having more than one of these, and quality dentistry was so big to me right at that point in my career. I had finally felt confident in myself. Like, how in the world am I supposed to scale that into other doctors when we're not there? You know what I mean? So, but you had this almost blind confidence in the idea, and that was like, that was I just got right on it with you.
Oh, nice. Let's talk about chapter 2 then, DeBerry dentistry.
Yeah.
So Winter Park dentistry, I think. So if I got there in October of 16, October of 17 is when we closed on the second practice. So I think it was 9 months that really you and I were in the trenches building this first practice, trying to get it to a point where we could scale.
Yeah.
And we had saved.
I think we grew that practice 50% that year when you Winter Park.
Yeah. I think we were definitely past $1 million pace.
Yeah,
for sure. The second location was just, for me, it was another complete unknown because we had, and you too, you had only ever had one practice. So learning how to bounce back and forth between the two was going to be a whole thing. But I think the biggest learning lesson for me was how difficult it was finding it and closing on it.
Yeah, I remember that day like yesterday. It was a nice day. The weather was great that day when we went up to DeBerry. We're like, it's nice up here.
Yeah.
The north.
The north.
4 seasons. Yeah, so we had found one practice on a broker site, and when we discovered a practice a block away that wasn't listed at all, and I think we just walked in and was like, hey, what's
we did a cold call.
We did
because it was a Friday that we went up there.
Yeah. Yeah, so the fact that there's these two offices a block away from each other that nobody seemed to want, because you could just tell nobody wanted these two practices. And we were scrappy at the time. We didn't, I think the financing that we had was, I think, all the money we had in our bank accounts, which wasn't much.
No, if anything.
So we went all in on acquiring those two offices, and one of the offices was ran basically into the ground, and then the other one was getting to that point. I remember counting every single chart in both practices, manually counting them. We were using all the knowledge that we had at that moment to make that decision to just push forward, and we did a seller finance deal with both locations because we basically had no money.
We went through a whole 3 to 4 month process with a bank and an investor that was going to co-sign with us that fell apart at a dinner the night before we were supposed to close.
Yeah, that was probably a really good thing that fell apart.
It was, but at the time, a complete gut check because we had worked a long
Yeah.
time to try to get these to close. And the
There
day
was a third
before,
office in DeBerry that
yep.
we actually wanted more because it was prettier and bigger.
Hmm.
But the prettier and bigger one sometimes isn't the one you really want.
No, no,
You
we
know,
found the diamond in the rough,
yeah, we
both of them.
found the diamond in the rough. So yeah, we also met our first associate at that time, who
Yes.
was going to be working in DeBerry, and everything seemed great in the beginning. We merged these two practices together. Yeah, we had never merged a practice before. I heard that it was a good idea, um, and in theory, it was. I it was a bit chaotic,
Yeah.
smashing two practices together, and worrying that the patients would stick. And here we are with the brand new dentist that isn't the dentist that they're used to,
Yep.
not even remotely close to the dentist that they're used to. And the first month seemed like it was going really well, and you know, but we quickly found out that this dentist we hired for DeBerry wasn't the right fit, and it was a bit of a crisis. The Winter Park dentist, the first associate, Dr. Whitehead, she was great, and there's really only room for one doctor at Winter Park.
Hmm.
So at that time, I basically walked out the back door, which was very nerve wracking for me because this is my baby. Like I these are my people. Like I know my patients very well. This is my livelihood. I've gone through a dark tunnel with this business, and I'm finally seeing light. Like to step away at the peak of my clinical career too. I mean, I was placing implants. I was doing root canals, Invisalign. I mean, I was at the peak of my clinical career. To step away because you know there's another practice, and there's
Hmm.
my focus needs to shift, there was a lot of anxiety with that for me,
Yeah.
and a bit of an unusual path for a dentist to just go full throttle and just cold turkey. um, but that's what I chose to do. And DeBerry was a bit of an emergency situation because that dentist wasn't working out, and because I was free now, I was able to jump in and save the day there by being the dentist in DeBerry. And what was the most valuable thing there, the employees were able to see who their real boss was, who the
Hmm.
real leaders of the practice were. It wasn't this dentist we hired.
Right.
um, and we were able to save face on this
Right.
business in a dire
Yeah.
situation. You were spending most of your time in DeBerry,
Yes.
just in the thick of it, dealing with all this trauma.
Talking people off the ledge.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, it took about 30 days, I think, for me to kind of prove to the
Hmm.
team and the patients, like, hey, like you're in a good place, you're safe.
Yeah.
And luckily, about 3 months in, we one of my friends at the time was actually looking for a new job. He was working at the VA, and I was like, "You should work in DeBerry. You'll do really well up there." And he's like, "Well, I'll do one day and see how it goes." And like he worked one day, and his schedule was full. He's like, "I'll come back tomorrow." Next day, schedule's full,
Yeah.
and then he stayed for a week, and then a month, and then it turned into, I think, a couple couple
I think
years,
so. A
two
couple of years.
years. He ended up working with us, and helped us stabilize DeBerry,
Hmm.
and helped us get it on the right trajectory.
Yeah. I think what was interesting now looking back at it for me is, and it's still kind of something we struggle with today, we never really had a plan.
Yeah.
And I think really the barometer for if we could keep growing the company, the DSO, was how stable the practices were, or just how like unbusy we were.
Yeah.
So if we felt like we had bandwidth, we would basically say like, I think it's time to start looking for the next one.
Yeah, you were really uh, persistent on keeping me out of the chair
Hmm.
for those early years. And you know, I was like a lost puppy dog for a while. Like I felt like I needed to gravitate back to the chair because that's what I know. That's what I went to school for. And you were really persistent about, you know, making sure that I was like not going to do that constantly
Hmm.
because yeah, you're right. Like in the beginning, like it was like everything was self-funded completely, and it was nerve-wracking when you these little bits of turbulence that happen. It's like, oh my gosh, like the airplane's going to crash and I'm going to be screwed. Like
Yeah.
we're going to be bankrupt. Those fears were very real in the
Yeah.
beginning, because you're dealing with things you can't control, people.
Hmm.
Um, when you're a single doctor in your own practice, I mean, you're in control of yourself as a dentist. Granted, you have employees that you struggle to control. Um, but add another doctor in a whole nother office, it's just it multiplies that fear factor, at least in the beginning.
For sure. So we were fighting this battle of, yes, it's easier for you to fill in, but it's making so we can't grow the real business. You know?
Yeah.
So I think it was, well, fast forward. So we eventually got the first two offices stable,
Mhm.
and it was time to grow again.
Mhm.
So we turned from really like a scrappy bootstrap company to where you and I literally had the conversation, how little money can you make and survive?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. So during that time, I not only did I pull a Houdini out the back door with my first dental office, my my wife, girlfriend at the time, was like, I want to move out west for a traveling therapy job. So because I was free to not practice anymore, I was like, well, I'll come with you, and I'll just commute back and forth between San Diego and Orlando. Um, and I just was like, if I can pay myself $40,000 a year this year while I make this transition from being a clinical dentist to being, I don't even know, like uh, some type of entrepreneur of some sort. It's like if I can pay myself like 40 grand a year, I can pay my bills and be happy. And to be honest with you, at that time in my life, I was extremely burned out. I had gone through this long dark tunnel with this practice. I was doing every type of procedure under the sun. I was managing my offices. I was taking like 1 week of vacation a year. I was just My nervous system was shot. So that was a big reason too to kind of like take this sabbatical for myself, because I
Mhm.
really need my mental and physical health was suffering at
Mhm.
that time. So yeah, I was able to like calculate that, I could, if this goes well with these two offices, I can survive. So, and you were kind of in the same boat. Like we were just like, what can we survive on?
Yeah.
We were both driving beat up cars at the time, and um, just living very. I had like three dudes as my roommate
Yeah.
when I met
I
you.
had a roommate too.
My rent was $400 a month.
Hmm.
Um, my mattress was on the floor.
Same.
Like it was
Same.
ridiculous.
Same.
It was ridiculous how
My dresser
prudent my personal life
my
was.
dresser was some old plastic bins that my roommate didn't want.
Yeah, and we held on to that lifestyle for probably longer than we needed to, but it was
Hmm.
kind of like it felt for you. It was my safe place.
Yeah.
Like my wife gets on to me all the time for how cheap I can be
Hmm.
on certain things in my personal life, but like when you feel like you're going to lose everything, it's it's like it's a happy safe place to be frugal on
Hmm.
for yourself. Not It's a whole different thing about being frugal with other people in your life, your employees, your loved ones and stuff. I'm talking about, what do I need?
Yeah.
um and I think that's part of our bond
Hmm.
as in our brotherhood together, is that we both probably could be very happy with extremely like
Yeah.
little things in life.
So fast forward 2018, we signed on with Citibank for our
Mhm.
bank, and we had a real DSO attorney who's been amazing. And we had to get a DSO
Brian
specific.
Elwood.
Yes, Brian Elwood.
He's
He's
great.
amazing. We had to get a DSO specific accountant as well, and turn this into a real business.
Yeah.
Somehow, Citibank let us purchase 3 practices simultaneously in 2018,
Yeah.
which the closing process for that, if anybody's closed on a practice, it was grueling,
Yeah.
like exhausting. When we closed, I remember zero celebration between you and I because we were exhausted.
Yeah, and I kind of did you dirty because I planned a trip to Big Sur and I didn't have reception, and I was just scrambling to find a signal in a place that has no. You're not supposed to go to this place in the world and have business calls. It's
Yeah.
like what it's built for. You're surrounded by mountains and ocean, no cell phone service. So yeah, it was hectic. I know, and that was 3 practices at once too, and that's the way Citibank wanted to do it because we
Hmm.
were so small. Like they're like this small little company. If they want to get our money, like you got to do it 3 times in one shot because that's really what makes financial sense to us. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah. So those, but I feel like that was a major turning point for us
Hmm.
as far as going from 2 practices
Yeah,
to 5. We sounded more like a business.
and we had a couple years under our belt at that point.
Hmm.
A small amount of maybe reputation, at least within
Very.
our practices.
Yeah.
We had gained trust with
Hmm.
our own people
Yeah.
for the most part, and I think that's what gave us the confidence to make that step.
Yeah. And another recurring theme, I think, for us has been once we were to that point where we could afford getting our mattress off the floor and didn't, it was because we reinvested in the business
Hmm.
at the sacrifice of ourselves. So at that point, we were able to bring in our first executive
Yeah,
to handle marketing for us because we got by, but we didn't know what we were doing.
yeah. I think I've met a lot of dentists and dental executive type people in the DSO space. What we did was really unique in that we brought executive talent in very early. Like
Hmm.
I didn't even have $1 million practice, and we brought you in an MBA. That's like unheard of, and that was kind of like the trend of what we did. We brought executive talent in extremely early because we could afford to because we were living off peanuts,
Yeah.
um, and that to me it was nerve wracking in the beginning. Bringing on 6-figure executive type people. Um, that early in a business formation, you know, now I know that's how a lot of companies start because maybe they're private equity backed or VC backed, and they build out their executive team from day one.
Hmm.
But for us, we kind of had a more of a bootstrap origin.
How many hours do you think you were working a week in 2018?
Well, when I was still practicing dentistry and doing this extracurricular hobby with you,
Hmm.
uh,
A DSO?
um, it was like 80
Yeah.
hours. It was all the time,
Yeah.
every day, all day. Um,
Did
but
your mind ever stop thinking about it?
no,
No.
no, never. I was fully engulfed in what we were doing,
Hmm.
to a point where like it was affecting probably my relationship, um, in my health and everything. I think like I had to learn how to balance all that, and that's a big reason why I just stopped practicing because there's some dentists out there that can juggle all of that, but for me, like I like I like to focus on one thing and
Hmm.
go big on just one thing and get
Yeah.
obsessive over one thing.
Well, I think what is interesting about that time period too for us is, at least for me, I had no background in dentistry whatsoever, but you had gone through the DSO model, the associate model, and the private practice model where you were the owner. And what resonated with me when we were forming something that was real was you kept saying, I've been through all 3 options for dentists. We need to come up with something better for the dentist. And we can because I've been there. I know what works in each one. And that was really your vision behind the whole company. And I think, for those people who have read Traction, you have the visionary and you have the integrator. You were clearly the visionary, and I was more of the on the ground level getting
Yeah.
it done. So what was that an accurate depiction of the vision of the company that you had?
Yeah, I mean, the first year I worked in that big corporation, I at the time I didn't realize how valuable that experience would be because they did a lot of things right, but they also did a lot of things that I felt like they could have done better.
Mhm.
And so once Operation Dental started forming, I mean, my knee jerk reaction would go back to my experience with that big DSO, because I was like, well, they were a big company and we're adding multiple locations. They have 1,000, we have 2, same
Right.
thing. Uh, so I was like, well, how do we compete with them? It felt like a David and Goliath scenario. Well, because I had worked firsthand with them, and we were starting to bring on dentists that also worked firsthand with the same company, it was like, well, they do these things right, but they also do these things that aren't right. So it gave us a really good blueprint of how to be better,
Mhm.
and be nimble, as we emerge as a DSO.
Mhm. And I think another huge differentiating factor between us is not going down the route of private equity, which
Hmm.
is what typically the large DSOs
Yeah,
have to do
yeah.
almost. And it's very difficult to not do it, but we've been able to grow to this point without private equity. Can you talk a little bit about private equity, like what it means and why we didn't
Yeah.
go down that
So,
road?
um, I'm really inspired by evergreen companies, which is a term for companies that are built to really last. Like, there's a book by called Infinite Game that kind of talks about that too. There's some industries that they kind of require venture capital, private
Mhm.
equity. If you're in tech and you're trying to become the next big Uber, like there's only room for like first place and second place for things like that. So I'm not saying like private equity and venture capital doesn't have its place, but in dentistry, I don't really see its value, even though it's very like uh, very much in our face right now. I think private equity companies have made it seem like they are the only option to grow a DSO, when in reality we've discovered that that's not the case. Um, I'm we're in the southeast, so companies like Publix, for example. Publix is a multi-billion-dollar organization that's 80% of it's owned by its own people. 20% is the original founders. To me, that is more American than any other entrepreneur story that that I've ever heard. There's another one that compares Gibson guitars versus Taylor guitars, where Gibson guitars was bought out by one of the biggest private equity firms in the world. Actually, the same private equity firm that bought the dental corporation that I worked for.
Mhm.
Ironically,
Mhm.
um, Gibson Guitar was basically deflated of its financial prowess. Like after 5 years, all the employees were left with virtually nothing. They took out $225 million against the company to pay themselves dividends, um, versus Taylor Guitars set up their founders set up an ESOP for their employees, which would transfer ownership over time to their people and make the company debt free in 10 years. So, like, I'm very passionate about like those types of companies.
Mhm.
And I get so excited when I hear like there's another company that has this type of structure. Like, we just went to Glidewell Dental Laboratories last week. He's not private equity backed. He never went public. I mean, he still runs this $1 billion company like it's a small business. I mean, he shows up to the campus every single day. Um, and he's still so passionate about what he does, and you can sense it. All his people like are extremely passionate about working for Glidewell, which I'm like, really, you're that passionate about working for a dental lab? They are,
Mhm.
because it offers them an amazing culture,
Mhm.
and that's something that I'm very proud for what we've done. Seeing a company like that and being able to tour their facilities, I'm like, I really think we're on the right path here of doing something great, and something that's that's good for like the American economy, you know, not just our industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you have ever anticipated that we would get where we are?
I mean, I trusted you when you said you wanted to have multiple practices. I saw how much weight you bench pressed and squatted, and I was like, I think you can handle it. So let's do it. No, I mean, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Mhm.
No, I thought I was going to be a dentist
Yeah.
uh, for my entire life,
Mhm.
or a musician,
Yeah.
one or the two.
What are your plans the next 3 years for us?
Um,
And keep in mind, we don't have plans or make them. I'm just curious.
what are the plans for Operation Dental?
Yeah.
I think it's important to me that we maintain our independence from external equity. I think what we're working on right now is trying to construct, our growth plan where we grow from the inside outwards.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of projects on the table right now.
Yeah.
A lot of different opportunities, a lot of startup opportunities that we're kind of scrambling to finance. Um, but yeah, I just want to make sure that we do not take our focus off where we came from. That's really important to me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know for me personally, whenever I'm having not a down day, but like a day where that's, you just, I work from home primarily. And there's some days that just financing is very difficult, and just there's a lot of things that are difficult in growth, the way that we've chosen to grow. But I know that just like going to a practice and talking to the people, it just like instantly boosts my spirits, and just is like,
Yeah.
okay, this is why we do this.
Yeah, and there's times where I feel like pretty hands off on the business these days.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to you guys and everybody. It's but I've been visiting a practice recently. They needed some clinical help, and I don't know, it felt like I was home again.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was a good feeling to kind of get hands on and like,
yeah,
because my story, the struggle that I had is so common. Like, and that's what I hope we can accomplish with, Operation Dental, and even like this podcast. Like, if anybody's out there listening,
mm-hmm.
especially if you're a dentist, it's like the struggle's real, and like, but you're not alone. And there's a way, like, through the jungle. It's just we're here for you. Like anybody that's listening to this podcast, reach out to us, even if you just want somebody to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're an independent organization, we're not going to pressure you into selling your office to us, because we probably don't have the money to buy your office. So yeah, I'm super passionate about talking, dentistry with dental professionals. It's like, it's probably my favorite thing to do. I won't shut up when I do it. So I apparently like it.
It's funny. Yeah, it's something that you say a lot recently is for us to not grow for growth's sake,
mm-hmm.
which is really hard for me, because I don't know why, but I just want to just keep building something as big as possible and growing, which we are.
Yeah, the best analogy is like, coming from a medical background, like, growth for the sake of growth is the etiology of a cancer cell.
Hmm.
So I love that saying. I use that
Mm-hmm.
saying all the time. Feel free to use that saying. Growth for the sake of growth is the etiology of a cancer cell. So we have to ask ourselves, are we growing just to grow, or are we growing in a qualitative way?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that might mean 0 revenue growth one year, but we grew internally as a company. Our dentistry got better.
For sure.
Our doctors got more training. Our staff members, hit their goals, and what they're trying to accomplish. Like, when you're looking really long term with the company, like, yeah, annual growth every year is great, but when you're in control of you don't have any private equity telling you have to grow 20, 30, 40% every single year, because they're going to exit the company and sell you off to some other private equity company that's going to want to do the same thing over and over again. I'm tired of that story, to be honest with you. Yeah. I'm sick of that story. Yeah. And that's where I get a bit defensive about, what we can do in our industry, because we're not inventing anything new here. Dentistry's existed for thousands of years. We're not building the next newest iPhone. Patients don't care that we're private equity backed or the biggest. Like, I truly think the bigger you are, at least in this profession, the worse you get. You get bigger and you start to suck more. Yeah. So I really, you asked, where do we want to go in 3 years? It's like, not there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And what excites me is the people who work with us, to see how happy they are who have worked in those types of companies,
Yeah.
to see the difference that we can make for them. That's the reason I want to grow, so we have more case studies of like people who we've really changed how they view dentistry and how they view their career.
You got to grow for other people, not grow
Yeah.
for yourself. And yeah, as the company grows, there's more opportunity for growth within the company.
Right.
You know, I tell doctors and team members, it's like as Operation Dental grows, you can grow.
Yeah.
So we really do have this like fiduciary responsibility to our people to keep growing.
Exactly.
It's just I want them all to understand, because maybe some of them are listening. It's like we want to grow qualitatively. We don't want to grow in a way where we're putting ourselves in jeopardy, reaching too far, building practices in the middle of nowhere, Florida, because, you know, and hoping and praying that, you know, it'll all work out.
Yeah.
I want us to, you know, do what's worked for us in the past and continue to do that, even if that means like maybe we don't add 5 practices next year. It's more so about like the long term and qualitative improvements in the organization.
Yep. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this walk down memory lane.
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah, and I look forward to the future.
Awesome. Me too.
Thank you.